just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's joined us so far. It's season 2, and honestly, the guests that we've had on the show so far have been so dynamic. But today I have yet another dynamic guest who, honestly, I'm so thrilled to hear what she has to say. We're kind of both in the same field, but she's going into like consulting, and I'm really interested with that. And also finding out more that she is going to be doing a lot of things on the continent of Africa. So, I mean, it's like the same worlds merged in one. So I can't wait to like pick her brain and ask her questions and find out even more resources about inclusive education that we can incorporate in Africa. So please, Miss Bree Gastaldi, if you could just introduce yourself. Welcome to the show. I like to do my little clap thing. If you could just tell our guests who are in the US and in Europe and in Africa, just who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Bree Gastaldi. I am an inclusion and behavior expert and a special education consultant. So I work with families and school districts and businesses specifically around inclusive practices and improving inclusive practices for their neurodivergent or differently abled loved ones, students, clients, whatever it may be. I've worked on some pretty fun projects in that regard. So that's kind of what I do now. But prior to that, I was a special education teacher for 7 years. And then after that, I was a special education coach in the school district. So I coach and train teachers. I led big professional development with the whole school and the district that I worked in. So kind of then got more into the adult learning side of everything. So I've had a little bit of time in the classroom and a little bit of time with adults. And now I'm kind of taking that experience and creating a business to help more people than I could in just one school district. So my professional goal has always been to try to help as many people as possible. So I started out in the classroom and then expanded a little bit with the district, and now I'm trying to expand a little bit more.
Oh, I absolutely love that. So we know of you and what you've done and how you've introduced yourself, but who's Bree? Like, how did you start in special education? A lot of my peers and colleagues in this field always tell me that it called them. So I'm so interested to find out how you even got into special education in the first place.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with that sentiment. I feel like it definitely chose me as well. And really, my journey in special education started with my own experience. So I have ADHD. I was diagnosed in middle school, started taking medication for it in middle school. I was never on an IEP or 504, but definitely, struggled sometimes with just maintaining focus and kind of those hallmark things that comes with ADHD, right? So school was definitely a bit of a struggle for me. I had math tutors and writing tutors and got a lot of extra help, but I never actually was on an IEP. But so I'd say that that's where I started, was with my own experience being a neurodivergent person. And then from there, as an undergrad, I actually studied psychology, which really helped me understand myself and understand kind of the world around me and the people that I interacted with. So my undergrad degree is in psychology with an emphasis in abnormal child psychology. And I started working in a clinic at the university, and it was a child and youth study center. And I just loved being around the kids and loved working and learning more. And I just was so into it. It was one of those things, like I was so excited to go and to be there. And I always had a smile on my face. I was so excited. And then I graduated from undergrad in 2009, which was a terrible time to graduate from college. There was no, there were no jobs available, especially in the schools. All of the programs were being cut. So I ended up working at a retail store in the Seattle area. I'm from Seattle. And the kind of funny thing about that was it was all moms that came in with their kids. So it was great because I got to hang out with the kids and help the parent out while they were shopping around. But it wasn't really my passion, something that I wanted to do full time. So eventually I did end up finding a position in a school in an autism program that I was really
Nice.
excited about.
That's super.
Yeah, so I
Nice.
started doing that, and I just was around such smart people and was learning so much, and I was like, you know what, I need to go back to school. And so I went and I got my master's in teaching.
Nice.
And then, you know, my certification in special education, and kind of started from there. And really, I feel like I've been in school ever since, to be honest.
I know.
It just like never really ends, but I just love to learn about it and to just kind of continue to build my toolbox of tips and tricks and things to try. And so I, you know, have another certification in abnormal child psychology.
Nice.
Or sorry, excuse me, applied behavior analysis.
That's huge.
Yeah,
that's huge.
yeah.
Wow.
So,
That's
yeah.
pretty good. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was enjoying
No,
what you
you're
were
totally
saying.
fine.
Yeah. So you're like a lifelong learner, kind of like me.
Oh,
We're like,
absolutely.
and even in this field though, I feel like you have to keep learning because everything is evolving and we're learning more, which is great because it's at the advantage of the students and ourselves and just the field. So, you know, you have to, you know, like you said, professional developments. And I think you went to like the CEC. Yeah, that's super cool. Okay, so I wanted to ask you a question about the IEP when you're growing up. Why weren't you on an IEP? Because you said you didn't get one when you were in school. Was it just because of the timing, or was a parental decision, your decision, knowing that you had ADHD? Just a question.
Yeah, for sure. I never qualified for one. My ADHD, I guess, wasn't severe enough to qualify me for an IEP.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that now that you're so experienced like in this field, even with other students who may not qualify for an IEP? Because we had a few students in my school too that didn't, and as a teacher I was just like, man, I really think they might need it, or those who did have it, I felt like didn't need to be on an IEP and maybe just accommodations or something.
Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of really great teachers growing up too. So I think that was a huge help. I also have, you know, a lot of just kind of coping skills and strategies that I had for myself too. Medication really helped me. Not on medication anymore and haven't been for a long time. You know, you kind of just learn how to manage things for yourself, and create systems and structures within your own home and life and everything that kind of just work for you. But I often refer to my ADHD as my superpower. You know, I try to think of like, you know, I'm not distracted. I'm really good at multitasking. You know, like how can I shift my thinking from thinking that this is a negative attribute about myself to actually seeing how is this a strength, and you know, something that I used to do with my students as well.
Yeah. Oh man, that is, we can talk more about that later. So, but I like the fact that, so I called this, you know, our topic for our discussion today was the universal design for learning. And someone who may not be in that field may not understand really what it is, but to those who are, it's like we're advocating for like every student, you know, and I want you to talk more about it because I know that that's something that you're passionate about. And I want this, this podcast, you know, episode today to really be a resource to, you know, students and teachers in America, especially students and teachers in Nigeria. And I wanted to talk more about like how I grew up, you know, going to school and how this was not even a thing. I mean, so the thought of it just excites me, and seeing that that's something that we can really implement, in many, schools, and collaborate with teachers. But please, tell us more, like, why are you so passionate about universal design for learning?
Sure. So I'm passionate about universal design for learning, or UDL. I might kind of interchange those two words so that the audience knows. Really, because what it does is allows multiple access points to curriculum. And it allows students to express their understanding in a variety of different ways. So traditionally, in probably how you grew up, how I grew up too, you have a teacher that stands at the front of the classroom and delivers a lecture, maybe using some sort of PowerPoint, or when I was growing up, it was the overhead transparent
the overhead
that they would write on. And they'd get, the marker all over their hand and stuff. Or, you would read from a textbook, this very traditional kind of, the student sits and receives, and the teacher kind of delivers, and that's how the lesson is always presented. And maybe students are writing notes in their notebook, maybe they're given a graphic organizer and they're filling things in as they learn. But really what UDL does is it says, okay, I know that there are a lot of different kinds of learners in my class. I know that Jessica prefers to read by herself. And Shalane loves to look at videos, watch YouTube videos. Maybe that's a better way for her to receive information. And then maybe Donovan prefers to listen to a podcast. So really you have your lessons objectives, but you have multiple access points to deliver that lesson. So you might say, okay, here's this graphic organizer, and I'm going to have all these different kinds of materials that the learners can use to learn what I want them to learn. That doesn't include me standing up at the front of the classroom, delivering this lecture. And, it's kind of this more, like I said, traditional way of delivering a lesson.
So we, growing up in Nigeria, I went to a boarding school, right? And I have some of my high school friends that listen to the podcast, and, they can so relate. And we would have a blackboard and the teacher with the chalk. And if you didn't get the notes, I mean, you're done. Like you are failing the class. And I just was bad at writing notes, like I'm more of a visual learner. So, but again, that was what we were taught. And, I think with many parts of Africa, it's like, well, if this is what you have, then kind of make do, but things are changing now. We have a lot of private schools in Nigeria that like really incorporate some of these like techniques, like we're talking about, but that's how we grew up, with a chalkboard and notes. And once that second side of the chalkboard was wiped off, that was it.
That was it. Yeah.
We didn't have textbooks. So that was it. And man, and I just think about how many of my friends maybe, may have had dyslexia and just didn't know. Or, we didn't even have special education teachers. So it's like, man, both of us are going to go change the world with this. We're going to make a difference. But that's why I like, UDL as well, because it really just changes a lot of those systems that are still very traditional in many parts of Africa. So, we know that, one of the three principles of UDL is how we as educators like present information, and how students in multiple ways can learn, especially students with disabilities. So what are some of those different ways of presenting information? And you may have touched on it. I wanted you to kind of expand on that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways. And really, as the teacher, as the educator, really your imagination is your only limitation, right? We have so many different things at our disposal now that we can learn from. We have podcasts, right? That's a great one. Podcasts, there's YouTube, there's all different kinds of leveled texts. So, you might have, oftentimes you have students in your classroom who have a wide range of reading levels, right? So you might present several different kinds of texts. You might present a newspaper article, you might present an actual textbook, or maybe a chapter from a textbook, or maybe there's an autobiography, or maybe there's, a nonfiction book or a fiction book that the student would better relate to from, that relates to the topic that you're talking about. Maybe there's a research article. Maybe some people are more interested in discussing things. So maybe they watch a little video and then there's, a set of discussion questions and the students will talk about what they learned as opposed to having to just sit and write or absorb it in some way, right? So, and really, the more you learn about your students and the way they prefer to learn, the more ways you will come to think of, oh, okay, well, for that student, I could do something like this or something like that.
Yeah. So do you think that, schools in, I want to say like more developed countries, I guess can focus on there, because the problem maybe with many parts of Africa is that the resources are just not there. So teachers can't even, be creative. And then when you're thinking of teachers that are not even getting paid, they're not thinking about that. But if I focus on like places where they're developed, they have the resources, the training, the experience and things like that. Do you still think that there are some schools, I think COVID may have changed a few things. I think it's gotten us teachers very creative, trying to connect with the students. But are there still traditional ways that we probably need to just kind of get rid of some of that and just shift, like really be thinking outside the box when it comes to like UDL today?
And I think that students today are totally different from when you and I were growing up as students, right? And kids just learn differently now than they did before. And so, and another thing too, when I'm coaching teachers, one thing I say is like, don't think that you have to change everything now, right? I mean, like, if you're interested in UDL, try one just try changing your entire year's approach to how you're going to teach everything. Maybe just try one unit, right? Try one lesson within one unit and see how it goes. Try it out. Don't get yourself down if it didn't work out perfectly the first time, right? We're always trying to model a growth mindset. So how can we reflect on how that lesson went? And then how can we use those reflections to better prepare for next time? And people who are trying UDL, they aren't changing everything all at once. They're doing these baby steps, and it might take them several years before their whole classroom is a UDL classroom, right? But I think that teachers get really bogged down and overwhelmed when they think, oh my gosh, here's this new technique. Now I have to change everything. And I've been doing everything right.
That's a very good point.
And now I need to try this other thing. And I don't even know where to start. And it's like, let's just reel it back in real quick and just think of one lesson in a unit that we can try this. And just see how it goes.
That's a very good point. I think, my heart really goes out to just education, during this time. It's challenging with the pandemic and COVID and all that, and still try to be like creative, and even with the students too. So I'm seeing a lot of empathy, like both ways, like parents and teachers and students, and just really that understanding. But I also know that with UDL, like you said, it involves a lot of diversity. Like today's classroom, again, is like I grew up with all Nigerians, all Blacks, right? So, and then I come to the States, I came for college, and it's like, whoa, like this different, and that's just has changed my way of thinking. But diversity is a huge part of UDL, like how learners learn, and and even culture, and even with special education, you have a lot of students that may not come from high income homes, earning homes, and all that. It's all part of diversity. Disability is part of diversity. So how can educators meet all the learning needs of every student in their class, especially students with disabilities, just to make that environment more inclusive? Because we can't talk about inclusion without representation, and it's just so much wrapped into it, and it feels like a lot for the educator. Sometimes I do feel like, wow, that's a lot, but like you said, how do we take it, like one chunk at a time in keeping diversity as part of our UDL approach?
And I really see UDL as a very inclusive way to teach, because it assumes that there's going to be barriers.
Exactly.
And in order to overcome those barriers, we allow choice, we allow options, right? So we're creating a culture of inclusivity within the classroom by implementing some of these UDL practices and saying, I know that my kids are going to all come to my room from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different everything, right? And then how can I create a culture here in my small, like, microcosm of a classroom, right? That allows those differences to be okay and like celebrates all of those differences. Right. And UDL is a great way to do that because it assumes that everyone is going to be different, learn different, express themselves different, right? So and it makes all of those differences be okay, because you're creating this structure that assumes everyone is already going to be different.
Wow, that's like coming into the classroom with that mindset, just changes everything. And the students like getting that from us, the educators, that, hey, like, we know you're different and we're going to work with you on that level. I mean, I think that's so huge, especially with like students. Like once a student like knows that, you see them, it makes it easy to instruct and for them to like get what you're trying to teach, because we're trying to change the world, right, for the positive from our little classroom with what we have. So in educating, no matter where you teach, I want to talk about assessments real quick. And this is something that we're working on, like in many classrooms in Africa. And I just have to give it also to the educators in Africa, because they are, I mean, some of these educators are like the States, using what they have, to just love the profession, but it could be a bit demoralizing when, like, you don't get the support that you should be getting from the government. So, but assessment is important, and data is important. We know that with special education, like, I mean, it's all about data, right? So why is this a very important component of UDL in just for educators knowing how to go about this whole process and making their classroom more inclusive?
Sure. So, I mean, we're always trying to make better informed decisions about what to do with our kids, right? And the way that we do that is by taking data and analyzing data and making data-driven decisions. And there's a lot of ways to do that, especially in special education. The data really tells us a story when we look at it from an analytical perspective. It tells us more about how the student is learning. Are they learning? What are they learning? And specifically with UDL, one thing that I love about UDL is that it provides, so not only is there a lot of choice and opportunity for presentation during a UDL lesson, but there's also choice and opportunity in expression. So in the assessment part, there's a wide, sorry, there's a bug like right in my face.
You're good.
Yeah, so expression is so huge, is a third principle of UDL. And so it says UDL not only says, I know all my kids learn different, but all my kids will express their understanding differently too. Exactly. So again, kind of going back to that traditional classroom, there's a pen and a pencil and you take a test, and maybe there's multiple choice questions, maybe there's short answer, long answer, maybe you write a paper as an assessment. But UDL says, what other ways can my kids express their understanding of what we just learned, right? Maybe they make a series of TikTok videos to
Mhm.
express their understanding.
Mhm.
Maybe they write a series of tweets and they tweet them out. Maybe they put on a play with another partner and they kind of do some sort of reenactment of something to express their understanding.
Mhm.
Maybe you have a student who's very musically inclined. Maybe you have them write a song or some lyrics or a poem or something like that. But how can we get kids to express what they understand in a variety of different ways too?
I love it. I remember my I worked in a severe profound classroom, and we would always have yoga Thursdays, and they never had that at my school site, and I'm like, why not?
Yeah.
I know I do it, but I was like, let me try this because again, sensory and it was just a lot. Like my class by like 11 o'clock, we were like done.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, how are we gonna make this work? And we would just do that on Thursdays, and really I noticed that the kids loved it, and it just kind of calmed us down to get ready for the next half of the day. And I would have like our site principal and vice principal come into my class, and they're like, wow, Miss Aja, your classroom is so calm, and people will just come and just chill. Like even the teachers lounge was not that calm, because I mean I had it going on, because I'm like, I was exhausted, by like 12,
Yeah.
But again, it allowed us to kind of get back, especially our math was like after lunch or something. So I kind of needed them, like present for that. So that helps. But those are some of the ways that I did it. And I just, took that one. It was our life skills class. I took one of those periods to do that. But I could do that in my class, and it worked. And other times we would draw or whatever, but it's so important, and it allowed me to just see that once we did that, like every Thursday, people were like present for math, and we were seeing changes in their learning, with that subject, and that was huge. But I totally agree, you have to kind of like assess everything so you can make the best informed decision. And in terms
And
of,
that's a perfect
yeah, go ahead.
example of using data to make a decision about things,
I know.
It doesn't always have to be this super formal graph with, with lines and data points and all kinds of things. Like that's a great data point right there.
No, and I think if you have a just principal or like leaders in your school site and building it, really like the leaders in our school absolutely gave me just room to come up with ideas. Like I always had an idea, like, what do you think about that? Sometimes they'll shoot it down and say, okay, we don't have the budget for that. I'm like, okay, but I always come back with something else. But it always led into like, okay, just making the classroom and the school more inclusive, and even our learning. Like we would have a few of our general education students come into the class for one of the periods and just kind of work with us. That way, our room was not always isolated, like the place to take our SPED, students, to this room, and they're just there, nobody knows what goes on in that room. So it kind of allowed for free flow of just social interaction, and that helped a lot with learning. But so speaking of instructional materials, we obviously have to diversify that. So what can we do in terms of instructional materials to meet the learning needs of students in a UDL classroom or curriculum?
Sure. So the first thing to do always is to learn more about your students. So there's a variety of different ways that you can do that. There are little quizzes that you can take, give to your students that are learning style preference assessments to see what is the spread of learners that I have in my classroom. Do I have learners that are more musically inclined or mathematically inclined or whatever it is? So just getting to know what kind of learners you have in your classroom would be the first step. And then the second step along the way is to find out what their interests are already. So, and how you can incorporate their interests into what you're teaching. And then to build rapport. make connections with your students, build that trust, build that community within your classroom, create that culture that allows everyone to be different and show up as their most authentic selves and celebrate everyone's difference, celebrate everyone for who they are and thanking them for showing up and being their truest, most authentic self in your classroom. So really just kind of those like, I don't know what foundational things, right? Creating the culture, getting to know the kids. Those are really the foundation. That's the foundation of UDL.
I love it. So you're going to be going to Africa, sometime this year, I think next year, and you're going to be taking all your awesome expertise, on the continent. I'm so excited. Like anyone who's going into like this field to just spread that goodness and really collaborate with educators on the continent. I'm super excited. So, one thing, about about many African classrooms is, if it's a public school, it's probably going to be overcrowded. It's going to be a lot of students. And in those situations, again, you have to think of just, where the country or that village or that, town, and how, just having students go to school is huge, and just teacher shortages. So how do we, think about all of that? Like, there are overcrowded classrooms as well in the States and in parts of Europe. So it's a problem, it's definitely a problem now with the pandemic. How can we think of UDL, with this challenge of, teacher shortage, overcrowded classrooms? I mean, how practical is it to say, well, I'm going to think of every student versus let's just get through the day, as an educator,
Yeah, and I think no matter how well staffed your class is, I always have staff say, we need more people here. we always need more people here. And in an ideal world, in an ideal world, we would have a better student to teacher ratio in all classrooms. And I do understand that it's definitely probably a higher student to teacher ratio in Africa. And UDL does not require more people. What it requires is really solid systems and structures within your classroom. So kids being able to move within the classroom, maybe around stations. So you can have different learning activities happening in different areas of your classroom.
Nice. That's a good suggestion.
Right. So you don't necessarily need another person or another body and another staff member, but really teaching, okay, when you're in this station, this is how I expect you to behave. This is what I expect you to learn. And then when it's time for us to change stations, then we move seamlessly throughout the classroom and we practice those routines. We practice modeling that to the students so that they know, okay, now we're going to go into a UDL lesson. This is how the classroom is going to work. And this is how we're going to work together to make it be as seamless as possible.
Yeah, that's huge. I like the thinking creatively in the class. And one thing that I'm really passionate about too is, thinking of UDL and inclusion. Many schools on the continent of Africa, you have like private schools, which with no fault of their own, like that's just the system and the culture and how it should be, because if not, students with disabilities may never even go to school. So you have private schools that kind of cater to students with disabilities. And then you have, a lot of public schools who may not have, special education teachers. And I think that's where my passion really is that in a public school, we really should have students with disabilities who can enroll because they're teachers to help with that. So couple of last questions before you go, because I know it's like late over here and it's morning over there.
Yeah.
So I'm very appreciative, Ms. Bree.
Yeah, of course.
So if you have a student who knows that they just learn differently, right? And may not be able to get into a sped program, like have an IEP, which again is fine if it doesn't, like if the student may not need it. But I think it's also important with our kids today in really helping them with just being self advocates for themselves, and knowing just who they are, how it is, like if they have, for example, like ADHD, like like know themselves, and be
Mhm.
able to advocate for themselves, especially today. Why is it, as us, a community, teachers, parents, older sisters, brothers, siblings, to teach, our family or student why self advocacy is so important,
Mhm.
especially in education.
Yeah, I think for students who are differently abled specifically, self-advocacy is so important because oftentimes we as adults or helpers or teachers or siblings will end
Mm-hmm.
up doing a lot of things for them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they are able to do it themselves, oftentimes we'll kind of like swoop in and help, even though they might not necessarily need it if you give them a little bit of extra time.
Yeah.
But students who are differently abled and just people in general who are differently abled are more susceptible to, they're a more vulnerable population. It's like subpopulation within
Yeah.
our community, right? So they're more susceptible to um, being taken advantage of, having things done for them, um, just kind of complying to whatever anyone tells them to do if they're whether they're an adult or kind of more of like a leadership figure in the community, just kind of following along with whatever they're kind of being told to do. They can just end up being more vulnerable to bad things happening to them. So self-advocacy is so important for that exact reason. It gives the individual more autonomy of themselves, um, provides them with an opportunity to say, no, I don't like that, or I can do that myself, or whatever it may be. So it improves their independence in
Yeah,
general,
confidence.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really huge. And that is my heart really goes out to a lot of parents who
Mhm.
are, working with their kids and teaching them,
Sure.
self-advocacy, especially in school, maybe on an IEP, and saying, well, this is what I need. No, I don't want that, and learning that, because a lot of times, like my heart also goes out to those students that just kind of fall in between the cracks. It's like
Yeah.
not really, AP or whatever. And it's like, okay, we know they're not doing well. And it's just like, what about, all students in general? But I think that's where, self advocacy, helps. And you were so gracious to let us know more about yourself and how you are, you say that ADHD is your superpower. And, how do we teach, students to have that willpower to be confident in, themselves, being differently abled,
Mhm.
standing up for themselves wherever they go, knowing who they are, knowing what they want. What can you say to those young people? Because it's important, like
Yeah.
they have to know that they can go to college if they want or not, or they can, strive for that job or dream or not. And really just believing in themselves, not
Mhm.
being too hard on themselves, and knowing that they have a gift. And that's so important, like, because we're a community, right? It's like the parents, the teachers, everyone is rallying around, each other to push us, encourage us to go out there and live our dreams and do what we want to do, things that are in our heart. So, what can you say to, young people who
Yeah.
may be even diagnosed late? I know my question is so long. I'm so sorry. I
I think
get
I'm
that.
tracking though. I hear you.
But it's important to me because like I want young people to feel confident, especially
Yeah, and
those who,
empowered. Yeah.
yeah, who have a disability. I want young Black men, young Black women,
Yes.
those in like those very marginalized groups to know
Mhm.
that they can do it. So
Yes.
what words of encouragement can you give and share?
Yeah.
um
Well, find out what your passion is and lead with your passion. we all have barriers, and not letting those barriers get in your way, finding a way to, like I said, ADHD is my superpower, finding ways to take what could be a negative and say, actually, you know what, this is a positive. Like I can use this to my advantage, and it makes me a better person because of it. Right. So, my advice to them would be to believe in themselves, to find what their passion is and go towards that. Find their community and the people that lift them up, the people that make them feel good about themselves. Don't waste time on people who don't make you feel good about yourself.
Yes.
So
and knowing that early, that's huge. Really surrounding yourself with positivity and anything that's not going to make you feel happy or good, or push you to be the best version of yourselves. Cut it. Yes. That's it.
Cut it out.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Bree. I appreciate it.
So fast.
That's good.
Yes, I know. Like we both just love talking about it so much.
Yeah. I had to really pace myself, okay, so many other questions, but if I go away from my script, it might just be a disaster. So I had to tell myself, stick to your questions. And then I started thinking this question could have gone before. Oh, IJ. And all these other things going on in my head. But
maybe we can do a follow-up sometime.
I would really appreciate that. And even a follow-up whenever you get back from Africa, you just,
I'd love that.
Super cool.
Yes, thank you so much. It was so lovely to meet you and talk to you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yes. And I will I'll definitely be in touch, and I'll leave maybe a number and an email. That way, I probably see us doing something else maybe in this field. Because it's all about a network. So I appreciate that.
Yes, I love that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Thank you. You too. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Miss IJ's Kids Inclusive Podcast this week. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so on our website at www.ijpopoola.com. Or if you want to write to us about topics you would love to hear covered on the show, the email address is popoloijelma@gmail.com, one word. And if you'd like to follow us on our social media pages, it's at Miss IJ's Kids. I am IJ Popoola, and you've listened to Miss IJ's Kids Inclusive Podcast.